In the autumn of 1823, a chill swept through the Pennsylvania town of Millbrook, carrying with it whispers of death. The air was thick with a dread that no one could quite explain. It wasn't just the changing season or the fading warmth of a once thriving community. No, something more sinister was unfolding, and it would leave the town marked forever. 17 deaths, each more unexplained than the last, gripped the hearts of Millbrook's residents. But it wasn't just the deaths themselves that haunted them. It was where the dead were prepared for burial. All of them had passed through the hands of one family, the Hartwells, owners of the local funeral parlor. They had always been seen as the caretakers of the dead, offering solace and closure in a community that trusted them. But something far darker was brewing behind their impeccable facade. It was a quiet town, barely 300 souls scattered across rolling hills, where life moved at a gentle, predictable pace. Yet the Hartwells, who had moved to Millbrook in 1801, brought with them an unsettling presence. Patriarch Ezekiel Hartwell, a man of few words but sharp eyes, built his funeral business from the ground up, earning the trust of the community with every service performed. In a world where neighbors knew each other's secrets, Hartwells were a family that had ingrained themselves into the town's heartbeat. No one questioned their ways, not even when their seemingly innocent services stretched the boundaries of what should have been normal. It was only a matter of time before death's grip on Millbrook grew far tighter. But in the fall of 1823, something about their practices began to stir suspicion. Dr. Samuel Harrison, a traveling physician on routine duty, would be the one to uncover what others refused to see. On the morning of October 15th, arrived to conduct his usual inspection, unaware of the gruesome discoveries that would soon unravel. The Hartwell family welcomed him with open arms, proudly showing off their immaculate funeral parlor, where bodies were embalmed, prepared, and laid to rest with care. But when Dr. Harrison laid his hands on the bodies, found something unsettling, a whisper of a truth that would shatter the illusion of respectability. Each body he examined carried signs of something far more sinister than natural death. Bruise marks, puncture wounds, traces of poison. These were not the telltale signs of illness or old age. These were the marks of something deliberate, something far darker than anyone had imagined. As he ventured deeper into the Hartwell establishment, the walls seemed to whisper back, urging him to look closer. But nothing could have prepared him for what lay beneath the surface. Basement of the funeral parlor held secrets too vile to comprehend, a labyrinth of horrors that could only have been orchestrated by those who truly understood the darkness of death and how to control it. Dr. Harrison had unknowingly stepped into a web of psychological manipulation and brutal, systematic murder. What started as a simple examination would soon spiral into a nightmare that no one, least of all him, could have ever expected. The true face of the Hartwell family was about to be revealed, and with it, the death of trust, security, and the very fabric of Millbrook itself. As we move deeper into the mystery, ask yourself, what do you really know about the people you trust most? What lies beneath the surface of the families who claim to care for you? The truth is darker than you might think. And sometimes, the most terrifying monsters wear the most comforting masks. It was an ordinary day when Dr. Samuel Harrison first set foot in the Hartwell funeral parlor, unaware that he would become the unwitting witness to a horror that would tear apart the town of Millbrook. The Hartwells had long been trusted by their neighbors, regarded as pillars of compassion in a tight-knit community. Their funeral parlor was seen as a place of solace, where the grieving could find peace in the final moments with their loved ones. But the air in that parlor was heavy, pregnant with unease that Dr. Harrison could not shake. As he examined the first body, that sensation only grew stronger. The woman in front of him, Elenina Fairchild, was a widow in her late 60s who had apparently succumbed to the ravages of consumption. But something about her didn't sit right with Dr. Harrison. The moment his hands touched her skin, he noticed the faint, yet unmistakable marks along her neck, bruises that were inconsistent with the disease she had allegedly died from. They looked like the kind of marks one would expect from strangulation, not from the gradual wasting away of tuberculosis. It was subtle, almost too subtle to question, but Dr. Harrison's instincts were sharp, honed through years of experience with the dead. Explanation Josiah Hartwell gave. Awkward positioning during the embalming process. Was flimsy at best, and it didn't sit well with the doctor. But Dr. Harrison was a professional. He knew better than to jump to conclusions without proper evidence. He had learned to keep his suspicions at bay, to let the facts guide his next steps. And so, he continued his inspection. But as he examined the second body, Marcus Webb, a healthy farmer who had supposedly died from a heart attack, the suspicions turned into certainty. His body had been punctured. Small, deliberate wounds that told a different story from the one the family had presented. Something was wrong, and it wasn't just with one body. It was the very nature of the deaths. Puzzle pieces were coming together in a way that was impossible to ignore. The question that loomed now was how far this deception went. Was it a one-time mistake, a freak accident, or had the Hartwells been hiding something darker, more methodical? Then there was the third body. Mary Patterson, a young mother who had supposedly succumbed to a fever. But when Dr. Harrison uncovered the faint trace of white powder around her mouth, his medical training screamed in alarm. This was arsenic, an incredibly lethal poison that could kill slowly undetected. Arsenic, poison that had been used for centuries to dispose of inconvenient people. A poison that left no trace except the subtle signs of a slow, agonizing death. The pieces were falling into place now, but what could Dr. Harrison do with them? He was an outsider, an investigator with no official power in Millbrook. The Hartwells were pillars of the community, and their status had shielded them from suspicion for years. They were trusted, respected. Their services had been relied upon by families for generations. And now, Dr. Harrison was questioning everything. Was it possible that the deaths were natural? Or had the Hartwells been systematically eliminating people, using their funeral parlor as a front for something far more sinister? The town of Millbrook had placed its faith in the hands of the Hartwells. They had built their reputation on trust and compassion. But what if that very trust had been weaponized? What if death itself had been turned into a means to an end? A business venture carried out in plain sight, hidden behind the guise of mourning and grief. Dr. Harrison couldn't yet prove it, but he was certain that the Hartwells were not merely caretakers of the dead. They were orchestrating death itself. And now, the walls of their funeral parlor were starting to close in on him. But it wasn't just the bodies that held the secrets. It was the basement, the hidden underbelly of the Hartwell establishment, where the true horrors of their operation lurked. Behind the scenes, the family's meticulous records told a different story. A story of methodical murder, poisoning, and experimentation on the very souls they had promised to care for. What Dr. Harrison had stumbled upon wasn't just a series of suspicious deaths. It was an institution of death itself, and it was thriving in the heart of Millbrook, hidden behind the walls of a family-run funeral parlor. If this was all true, then what did that mean for everyone who had trusted the Hartwells with their loved ones? How many families had been unknowingly complicit in the horrors of this so-called funeral service? What kind of people could carry out such a monstrous operation right under the noses of an entire community? The truth was beginning to look far darker than Dr. Harrison had ever imagined, and he was beginning to wonder just how deep the rabbit hole went. Dr. Harrison had already seen enough to convince him that something insidious was at play in the Hartwell funeral parlor. But as he descended the narrow staircase into the basement, where the family conducted their embalming in preparation of the dead, the true horror of the situation began to unfurl like a sinister flower. This was no ordinary mortuary. It was a laboratory of death. The basement, which should have been a simple preparation room, was anything but. It was cold, unnervingly sterile, and eerily quiet, save for the faint sound of Dr. Harrison's own breath. The air was thick with a strange metallic smell, and the faint hum of chemical solutions filled the space. The embalming tables gleamed under the harsh light, but the real terror was hidden in the corners, behind closed doors and beneath layers of carefully crafted lies. Dr. Harrison noticed the glass jars first. They were lined up neatly along the shelves, each containing preserved human organs, floating in strange, murky solutions. The jars looked out of place in a funeral parlor where death was supposed to be met with reverence and respect. These organs weren't remnants of natural decay. They were fresh, too fresh, and many of them appeared to have been surgically altered. As his eyes swept across the room, he couldn't help but feel a deep, unsettling sense of dread. This was not a place where the dead were simply prepared for burial. This was a place where death was studied, experimented upon, and manipulated. But it wasn't just the organs that caught Dr. Harrison's attention. There was something far darker hidden behind the scenes. Something even more chilling. As he explored further, he spotted a leather-bound journal partially concealed beneath a stack of burial clothes. The family had obviously tried to hide it, but the edges of the journal stuck out. Clear invitation for Dr. Harrison to discover the horrifying truth within. He hesitated, but only for a moment. His curiosity drove him to pull the journal from its hiding place, and as he flipped through its pages, his stomach churned. What he saw wasn't just a record of funeral services. It was a detailed log, meticulously kept, of the Hartwells' twisted experiments with death. The journal contained pages upon pages of handwritten notes, each one describing the various methods used to cause death, the reactions of the victims, and, most disturbingly, the family's observations during their murders. Each entry was precise, clinical even, like a scientist conducting an experiment. The family had recorded every detail, from the type of poison they used to the way it made the victim's body react. Some of the entries seemed to detail the suffering of their victims in almost gleeful terms, as if they took pleasure in studying the terror and pain they caused. The journal was like a map, a roadmap of death, designed to ensure that no evidence of foul play could ever be discovered. But what horrified Dr. Harrison the most was the realization that this wasn't just random killing. The Hartwells were not merely murderers, they were predators. They had perfected the art of selecting victims, targeting those who were weak, vulnerable, or isolated. The elderly, the sick, the financially desperate. These were the people the Hartwells preyed upon. Their deaths were always convenient, always timely, always framed in such a way that no one ever suspected foul play. As Dr. Harrison read further, he began to understand the true scale of the family's operation. They weren't just taking lives, they were harvesting them. They had developed a system, a sophisticated network of murder and manipulation, designed to go unnoticed by the outside world, and they had been doing this for decades. What struck him as even more horrifying was the realization that the Hartwells had been operating in plain sight for years, their funeral parlor serving as the perfect cover for their crimes. How many people had walked into that building, trusting the family with the remains of their loved ones, never knowing that those very loved ones had been killed at the hands of the very people they thought were there to help. The thought was nauseating, but the most chilling part of all was the realization that the family was not merely conducting these killings for financial gain or out of some twisted sense of power. No, it went deeper than that. There was something more sinister at play. Dr. Harrison's eyes scanned the journal, lingering on certain entries where the family seemed to take a scientific approach to death. Were studying it, dissecting it, trying to understand the very essence of life and how to control it. It was then that Dr. Harrison realized the horrifying truth. The Hartwells were not just serial killers, or experimenting with the very nature of death itself. They were trying to find ways to extend life, to cheat death, and to control it. They had crossed a line that few could even fathom. What they were doing was beyond murder. It was an obsession with immortality, with power over life and death. As Dr. Harrison continued to pore over the journal, the weight of what he had uncovered began to settle in. This was no longer just about a few suspicious deaths. This was a systematic, long-running operation that had infiltrated every part of Millbrook, and potentially beyond. The more he read, the more he realized that this wasn't an isolated case. This was part of something much larger, something that stretched far beyond the walls of the Hartwell funeral parlor. Dr. Harrison knew he had to act quickly. He had seen enough to know that the family's dark history was not just a series of unfortunate events. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign of death, and it was still ongoing. The question now was, what could he do to stop them? The answer, as he soon realized, was far more complicated than he had ever imagined. The Hartwells had covered their tracks so well, their ties to the community were so deeply entrenched that exposing them would be far from simple. But the truth was undeniable now. The Hartwells were murderers. Nothing more, nothing less. And they had built their empire on the bodies of the dead. The real question was whether Dr. Harrison would survive long enough to expose them. As Dr. Harrison continued to turn the pages of the Hartwell family's journal, the weight of what he was reading grew unbearable. This wasn't just the diary of a few rogue individuals. They were a family, an entire system operating as one. Their meticulous nature, their ability to cover their tracks, and their network of secrecy within the town spoke volumes about how long they had been perfecting this twisted operation. The journal detailed over 20 years of carefully planned murders, conducted with a cold, scientific detachment. What Dr. Harrison had discovered was not the isolated work of a few delusional minds, but a well-oiled machine of death, one that had become far too entrenched in the fabric of Millbrook to be easily uprooted. The more Dr. Harrison read, the clearer it became. These were not just random victims, they were targets. The family had developed a keen eye for those who were ripe for elimination. Lonely widows, struggling farmers, the elderly with few remaining relatives, they were the perfect candidates for the Hartwells' grisly experiments. After all, who would miss them? Their deaths were never questioned because they fit the natural narrative. The weak and frail finally succumbing to the inevitable. But the Hartwells weren't just after the vulnerable. There were names on that list that sent a chill down Dr. Harrison's spine. Healthy, robust individuals who had died under circumstances too peculiar to ignore. As he flipped through the pages, he saw references to people who had been poisoned with increasing precision, those who had suffered under the family's experiments with fear and pain. The brutality of it was staggering, but even more unsettling was the apparent pride the Hartwells took in their work. The journal wasn't just a record. It was a triumph, a trophy. Each victim was documented with cold, clinical detail. They didn't just kill. They studied the way their victims died, how different poisons affected the body, how fear could slow or quicken a heart's last beat, how the human body responded to torture. They were perfecting their methods, refining them over decades, their cruelty growing with each victim. But Dr. Harrison was no fool, knew that a family this deeply embedded into the social fabric of Millbrook couldn't just be exposed easily. They had built their lives on trust, on respectability. Funeral parlor was a place of grief and solemnity, a sanctuary for those in mourning. They were pillars of the community, trusted implicitly by every family who had buried a loved one there. To accuse them of mass murder would be not only absurd to most, but dangerous. If he spoke out, Dr. Harrison could very well become the next target. But how could he live with the knowledge of what he had discovered? How could he walk away and leave those innocent victims to their fate? The walls of the funeral parlor, the quiet town of Millbrook, were closing in on him, and he realized that the only way to stop this madness was to expose the family's horrifying truth to the world. He knew he needed more than just circumstantial evidence. He needed something concrete. And as he stared at the journal, at the gruesome accounts of poisonings, strangulations, and surgical experiments, he realized there was something even darker hidden within the family's notes. A pattern, a network of contacts that extended far beyond Millbrook. The family had been moving from town to town, setting up funeral homes wherever they went, spreading their death business like an insidious virus. The Hartwells weren't just confined to one small town. They had been killing across multiple states. Their reach was vast, their influence insidious. But what disturbed Dr. Harrison most was the discovery of something even more dangerous. The journal was not just a record of their crimes. It was a manual, a guide for others. The Hartwells had been training others, grooming apprentices in their deadly art. The entries described how the family had taken on students in their years of operation, passing on their knowledge of poisons, surgical techniques, and methods for creating the perfect murder. They had created more than a network of death. They had created a legacy. And there were others out there, learning from the family, continuing their work. Dr. Harrison realized that this wasn't just the story of a single family's reign of terror. This was a multi-generational operation, one that was continuing even as he stood there, reading the journal. The Hartwell family's reign of terror was not an isolated incident. It was part of a much larger, far-reaching network of death, and it was growing. The more he learned, the more trapped he felt. The Hartwells had created an empire of death, one that was so well hidden in plain sight that even the most trained eye could miss it. They had used their funeral parlor to bury their darkest secrets, to hide their victims, to make death their business. The people who trusted them, who buried their dead under their roof, had no idea they were feeding into this monstrous operation. Dr. Harrison knew what had to be done. He had to expose them. But how? The family was too deeply ingrained into the fabric of the town, couldn't simply walk into the local authorities' office and accuse them without proof. And even if he had enough evidence to convict, the people of Millbrook would never believe him. Trust between the family and the community ran too deep. They had been the Hartwells' shield for years. He had to act quickly, but his every move was becoming more dangerous. The closer he came to the truth, the more aware he became of the risks involved. The Hartwells were not just killers. They were manipulators, experts in psychological control. They had perfected the art of blending in, becoming trusted members of the community. And they had done it so well that no one suspected them. No one but Dr. Harrison. But what would it cost him to expose them? As the weight of his decision loomed over him, Dr. Harrison knew that once he made the move to expose the Hartwells, there was no turning back. He would be walking into the very jaws of the monster. Family had already proven they would kill to protect their secrets. And now, he had become the target. But there was no other choice. The truth had to come out, even if it meant risking his own life. Harrison's heart raced as he slipped the journal back into the hidden compartment, his mind whirling with the revelations he had just uncovered. Every fiber of his being screamed that he had to act. Now, but the weight of what lay ahead hung heavy in the air like a dark cloud that refused to dissipate. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, as if the very walls of the Hartwell funeral parlor were alive with malevolent intent, waiting for him to make a misstep. It wasn't just the journal that filled him with dread, it was the realization that the Hartwells were far more than just a family of killers. They were masters of manipulation, predators who had honed their craft for decades. They had taken root in Millbrook like parasites, feeding off the community's trust and goodwill. Their funeral parlor had been a front, a facade of compassion and respectability designed to hide their true purpose. And it had worked. For years, they had moved freely, hidden in plain sight, preying on the vulnerable and the unsuspecting. Dr. Harrison knew that exposing them would not be as simple as handing over the evidence. He had to be strategic, had to gather irrefutable proof. Proof that would leave no room for doubt. But the more he thought about it, the more dangerous it became. Every moment he stayed in Millbrook, the more likely it was that the Hartwells would catch on. They were too clever, too cunning. They had killed for years without raising suspicion, and they wouldn't hesitate to eliminate anyone who stood in their way. His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise. Footsteps, faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the staircase. Dr. Harrison froze, his body tense with fear. The Hartwells were home. He had overstayed his welcome. If they caught him here, it would be too late. He had no choice. He had to leave, and fast. But as he turned toward the basement door, his mind raced with the gravity of the situation. The town was blind. The people of Millbrook had trusted the Hartwells implicitly. They had seen them as caretakers of dead, pillars of the community. They would never believe that these seemingly upstanding citizens were capable of the horrors Dr. Harrison had uncovered. He could already imagine the skepticism, the disbelief, the whispers of insanity. If he couldn't prove it, his accusations would be dismissed as nothing more than the ravings of a paranoid outsider. That's when he realized the depth of the family's control over Millbrook. It wasn't just about the murders. It was about the trust they had built. Trust that was so solid, so unshakable, that no one could question their authority. The Hartwells had created an invisible web around the town, a web of fear, manipulation, and psychological control that had ensnared everyone. Even the most well-intentioned members of the community had unknowingly become part of their plan, feeding into the cycle of death and deception. The footsteps grew louder. Harrison's heart pounded in his chest as he realized the family was only moments away from discovering his intrusion. He couldn't afford to get caught. Not now. Not when he was so close to the truth. The evidence he had gathered, his notes, his observations, were the key to unraveling their entire operation. But without the proper documentation, without irrefutable proof, the truth would remain hidden forever. In that moment, a decision was forced upon him, one that would change everything. He had to act now, before it was too late. He couldn't just leave, couldn't simply walk away and hope someone else would uncover the truth. This was his responsibility. The weight of the lives lost, the lives that could still be saved, pressed down on him like a physical burden. He couldn't turn back. With a final glance at the basement door, Dr. Harrison made his decision. He knew the risks, knew that walking into the lion's den was an act of madness. But in his heart, he understood that there was no other choice. The truth had to be revealed, no matter the cost. And as the footsteps grew nearer, Dr. Harrison knew one thing for certain. He was about to enter the very heart of the Hartwell family's darkness. There was no turning back now. But little did he know, his discovery was only the beginning. The family's reach extended far beyond the walls of the funeral home, and exposing them would open a door to a world of unimaginable horrors. Hartwells weren't just criminals. They were part of a much larger conspiracy, a network of death that had been operating under the radar for decades. And now, Harrison had unwittingly become the key to exposing it all. The clock was ticking. His every move was now being watched, every breath an echo in the silent room. The deeper he delved into the truth, the more dangerous it became. The family would stop at nothing to protect their secrets, and Dr. Harrison was about to learn just how far they were willing to go to bury the truth forever. Would he survive to tell the tale? Or would he become just another victim, lost to the shadows of the Hartwell family's reign of terror? Harrison's mind raced as he carefully made his way back to the basement door, silently praying that his escape wouldn't be thwarted by the Hartwells' return. Every step felt like an eternity, and the weight of the secrets he had uncovered pressed heavily on him. He knew he couldn't afford to leave anything behind. Any trace, any clue that would lead the Hartwells to him. As his fingers grazed the cold, iron handle of the basement door, he held his breath, listening intently for any sound from above. The footsteps had stopped, but the dread remained. Time seemed to stretch, each second dragging longer than the last. Dr. Harrison's pulse quickened, his instincts screaming at him to move faster. He turned the handle with deliberate care, slowly easing the door open. The air was thick with the stench of embalming chemicals and decay, but there was no time to linger. With a final glance at the hidden journal, he slipped into the basement hallway, his footsteps muffled by the creaking wooden floor. As he reached the back door, Dr. Harrison was gripped by an unsettling sense of urgency. He had to get out of Millbrook, now. If he stayed any longer, the Hartwells would have time to piece together what had happened. They would come after him, and he knew that once they caught him, his life would be forfeit. But as he neared the rear exit, chill ran through him. The door was ajar. It shouldn't have been. Someone had been here before him. Dr. Harrison paused, his breath shallow, every muscle tense. Could feel the walls of the house pressing in, closing around him. The haunting realization hit him like a freight train. They knew he was here. They had known for longer than he had suspected. He had walked right into their trap, and now he was the prey. The faintest sound echoed from upstairs. Voices low and deliberate, muffled by the walls. He could hear the rustling of clothing, the shuffle of footsteps, and the unmistakable whisper of a door creaking open. They were searching for him. His heart pounded in his chest as he quick-ducked behind a pile of old burial clothes, the faint stench of death rising around him. His mind raced, searching for an escape. He needed to think. He needed a plan. But in the silence, could already hear the faint whisper of footsteps descending the stairs. The family had come home early. They knew. They had known from the moment he set foot in their domain. And so, Dr. Harrison realized the gravity of his situation. There was no way out. Not through the back door, not through the basement, not even by running. The Hartwells had been preparing for this. They had been watching him, waiting for the moment when he would slip, when he would let his guard down. He had underestimated them. This wasn't just about the murders. The Hartwells were far more cunning, far more dangerous than he had imagined. They weren't simply a family of killers. They were manipulators, puppeteers, controlling not just the dead, but the living as well. The trust of the community, their respectability, their social standing. They were all part of the web the Hartwells had spun around Millbrook, ensnaring everyone who walked too close. But it wasn't just their manipulation of the community that made them so dangerous. The Hartwells had mastered the art of psychological control. They knew how to prey on fear, how to twist the truth to their advantage. They knew that once they were exposed, once their secrets were brought to light, the entire town would turn on them. So they had laid the perfect trap, one that Dr. Harrison had walked right into. The footsteps above grew louder. The sound of their movement was deliberate, practiced. They were hunting him now, circling the house, waiting for him to make a mistake. Dr. Harrison's thoughts raced. How had they known? How had they anticipated his every move? The answer was clear. He had underestimated them. They had been in control all along. Every death, every victim, every calculated move had been part of their greater plan. And now he was just another pawn in their game. As the footsteps drew closer, Dr. Harrison's mind locked on the only option left. He had to leave. He had to escape. There was no other choice. The evidence he had gathered, the journal, the knowledge, everything had to be brought to light. If he didn't act now, the Hartwells would erase it all. They would destroy the truth, just they had destroyed so many lives before. With every ounce of strength he had left, Dr. Harrison made his move. He darted from his hiding place, rushing toward the narrow basement window he had noticed earlier. It was small, barely large enough for him to squeeze through, but it was his only chance. He reached it just as he heard the heavy footsteps of Ezekiel Hartwell approaching the basement door. The handle turned, and Dr. Harrison could hear the faint creak of the door as it opened. There was no time to hesitate. He shoved his body through the window, feeling the sharp edges of the frame scrape against his skin. The cool night air hit him like a slap in the face, the scent of damp earth filling his lungs as he tumbled to the ground outside. He had made it. He was out. But the danger was far from over. The Hartwells would be on his trail, and the evidence he had collected would only serve to make him a target. He had no time to waste. The town of Millbrook was too small. They would come after him, hunt him down, and make sure that the truth he had discovered never saw the light of day. As Dr. Harrison ran through the darkened streets, the weight of what he had uncovered pressed heavily on him. Knew that he couldn't stop now. The Hartwells had built their empire on blood and death, and they would stop at nothing to protect it. But Dr. Harrison had something they didn't. He had the truth, and the truth, no matter how dark, no matter how dangerous, was the one thing the Hartwells could never control. He didn't know if he would survive the night, but he knew one thing for sure: the game was no longer just theirs. It was his now. Dr. Harrison's breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted through the narrow streets of Millbrook, his heart pounding against his chest. The small town was quiet, too quiet for what was happening. The houses around him loomed like silent sentinels, unaware of the horror that had just unfolded within the walls of the Hartwell funeral parlor. The air smelled of damp earth and distant smoke from chimneys that hadn't yet been put out for the night. But Dr. Harrison knew that the calm was only an illusion. The Hartwells were out there, hunting him. Every footstep echoed in his ears as he ran. The truth that had driven him to this moment, the horrors he had uncovered in that cursed house, felt like a weight in his chest, dragging him down. But he couldn't stop now. He had exposed them. He had seen the journals, the notes, the meticulous plans. He knew too much to simply disappear. His mind kept flashing back to the journal's entries, the way they had carefully documented every murder, every victim, the poisonings, the surgical procedures, the way they had perfected each killing, death. What truly terrified him was not just the gruesome methods, but the underlying psychology. The way the Hartwells viewed their actions as a natural course, as if they were performing an essential service, rather than committing heinous crimes. Their conviction, their calmness in the face of death, their ability to deceive. These were the true dangers. They were experts at blending into the fabric of Millbrook's life, and now they would stop at nothing to ensure that their secret remained buried forever. Familiar streets of Millbrook blurred around him as Dr. Harrison veered left into a darkened alley, his shoes slapping against the wet cobblestone. He had no plan, no destination in mind, only the instinct to escape. The thought of the Hartwells catching up to him, silencing him before he could expose their operation, filled him with a primal fear. Knew they wouldn't hesitate. They had taken lives before, and he had just made himself their next target. Dr. Harrison's mind flickered to Thomas Creed, the elderly father of Martha Hartwell, who had once been a part of this nightmare. Creed had betrayed his own flesh and blood in a desperate bid to escape the clutches of his family's insidious hold. But Dr. Harrison knew, deep down, Creed's fate had already been sealed. The family had long since cast him aside, just as they had with all their victims, once his usefulness had run out. Now, it was Harrison's turn to face the same fate. He rounded the corner, running harder now, his muscles screaming in protest, but the adrenaline kept him going. He had no choice but to keep running. Couldn't let them find him. Couldn't let them erase the evidence. The journal, the notes. It was all that stood between the Hartwells and the continued freedom to prey upon innocent lives. In the distance, Dr. Harrison saw the faint glow of lanterns and heard the unmistakable sound of horses' hooves striking the dirt road. The town's militia, a group of local men who had been summoned by Ezekiel Hartwell, no doubt to track him down. They would have heard of his investigation by now, and word would have spread like wildfire. The town, too small to hold a secret for long, would soon be crawling with people searching for him. Fear twisted in his gut. The Hartwells were always prepared. They were the masters of manipulation, and their network of influence reached far beyond their immediate family. Even if Dr. Harrison managed to escape Millbrook for good, the family's web would still follow him. Every person who had come in contact with them was a potential threat. As the lantern lights grew brighter, Dr. Harrison ducked into a narrow building, its wooden door barely ajar. He slipped inside, pressing his back against the rough walls, breathing heavily, his hands shaking as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. His mind raced with the desperate realization that the search was closing in. The militia would be scouring the streets, turning every corner, looking for any trace of him. It was then that a thought struck him. He had forgotten the most important thing. He had seen the journal. He had uncovered the family's secrets. But where was it now? He had left it in the basement, hidden behind the burial clothes. He had been so focused on escaping that he had abandoned the one thing that could expose them for good. His blood ran cold. He had to get back there. The truth was in the journal. It was the key to everything. The Hartwells found it before he could retrieve it. The entire investigation would be for nothing. The community would never know the full extent of what had been happening beneath their noses for decades. The Hartwells would remain untouchable, their empire of death continuing unabated. Dr. Harrison knew the danger now. He couldn't just flee. He had to return to the funeral parlor, even if it meant facing the Hartwells head-on. The stakes had become far higher than his own survival. This was about stopping them, about bringing the truth to light before the town of Millbrook, and the entire region fell deeper into their grasp. But as the sounds of the approaching search party grew louder, Harrison knew that time was running out. He had to make a choice of face the Hartwells and risk everything, or run and hope that one day, someone else would uncover their dark history. But deep down, he knew that if he didn't act now, the chance to stop the Hartwells would slip away forever. The decision had already been made. He would go back into the heart of the nightmare, even if it killed him. The heavy thud of Dr. Harrison's heartbeat reverberated in his ears as he stepped back onto the dirt road, the dim glow of lanterns still flickering in the distance. He had to move quickly. The militia was close, and every second he wasted would bring him closer to being caught, closer to losing the last remaining chance to expose the truth. The town of Millbrook seemed impossibly small now, as though the walls themselves were closing in. Every house, every alley, every corner felt like it could be a trap, a place where the Hartwells' influence stretched far and wide. They were experts at making their enemies feel helpless, at turning the very fabric of the town into their personal playground. The sense of dread that had clung to him since his first day in Millbrook now felt like a physical weight. The journal. It was all that mattered now. He couldn't let it fall into their hands. Harrison had seen too much to simply walk away and hope that someone else would take up the mantle. The Hartwells were not just killers, they were monsters, invisible and omnipresent, lurking behind the facade of a normal life. Their crimes were too far-reaching, too vile, to be buried along with their victims. If he didn't expose them now, town would forever remain their silent accomplice. With his back against the wall, Dr. Harrison made his decision. He was going back to the Hartwell funeral parlor. It wasn't just a choice, it was a necessity. He slipped through the narrow streets, staying to the shadows, his mind focused only on one thing, the basement of the Hartwell house. The journal was still there, hidden in the same compartment where he had left it. But the closer he got to the funeral parlor, the more his stomach twisted with fear. The lights were on. The family was home. They were already in the process of covering their tracks. If they knew he was coming back, if they even suspected, there would be no mercy. Dark. Harrison's hand trembled as he pushed open the door to the funeral parlor's rear entrance. The familiar, cold air hit him, the scent of embalming chemicals and the dust of forgotten secrets. He moved quickly, only sound his own breath and the faint creak of floorboards underfoot. The basement door was just ahead, and his pulse quickened as he approached. But before he could reach the stairs, a noise from behind made him freeze. It was a voice, soft but unmistakable, a woman's voice. "You shouldn't be here." Doer. Harrison's blood ran cold as he turned slowly to face the figure in the doorway. It was Rebecca Hartwell, her innocent expression hiding a mind far darker than he could have ever imagined. She stood there, framed in the doorway, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. Her eyes, however, were cold, calculating, like those of a predator. "I knew you would come back," she said, her voice almost melodic, but the words themselves were like daggers. "You have no idea what you're walking into, do you, Doctor?" Dr. Harrison's mind raced. He hadn't expected her to be here, especially not alone. But somehow, he had known that the Hartwells would be ready for him. The family wasn't just a group of murderers. They were manipulators, too. They could read people, understand their motives, predict their every move. "You're too late," Rebecca continued, stepping forward with an eerie calmness. "You've seen what we've done, and now you're trying to stop it. But you can't, Doctor. You can't stop something that has been in motion for so long. It's too late." Her words twisted in his mind like a noose tightening around his neck. What had he walked into? What was she saying? Was she threatening him? Or was she revealing the truth about the family's plans? Dr. Harrison's hand instinctively went to the pocket where he had hidden the journal. But before he could make a move, Rebecca raised a finger, signaling for him to stop. "Don't be foolish," she said, her voice now laced with something darker. "You're already in over your head. My family has made sure of that. You've already seen what we can do, haven't you? The lives we've taken, the experiments we've perfected." Rebecca stepped closer, her eyes locked on his, and in that moment, Harrison realized just how much danger he was in. She wasn't just another member of the Hartwell family. She was part of the machine, a willing participant in the madness that had consumed them all. And in that moment, he understood that the Hartwells weren't just a family. They were an institution, a secret society of death, one that had been growing for generations, feeding off the trust and naivety of the people around them. "You think you can walk in here, expose us, and leave unscathed?" Rebecca asked, her tone almost mocking now. "You're more of a fool than I thought." Dr. Harrison's eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. There was no way out. Not now. The moment he had stepped back into the funeral parlor, he had sealed his fate. But he wouldn't go down without a fight. He couldn't. "I've seen enough," Dr. Harrison said, his voice steady, though his heart thundered in his chest. "And I'll expose you all, no matter the cost." Rebecca's smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. "You think you can stop what's already been set in motion?" she asked, her eyes gleaming with a dark satisfaction. "This is only the beginning, Doctor. What you don't realize is that the web we've woven extends far beyond this town. There are others who will continue our work. And when you're gone, our legacy will live on." With those final words, Rebecca stepped aside, revealing a shadowy figure standing just behind her. Harrison didn't need to look twice to know it was Ezekiel Hartwell. The patriarch, the mastermind, the one who had started it all. The true face of the Hartwell nightmare. "You've been playing in our game, Doctor," Ezekiel said, his voice cold and calculating. But you've made a fatal mistake. You think you're the one in control. You think you've discovered the truth. But the truth, my friend, is that you're already trapped. You've been trapped since the moment you stepped into our lives. Dr. Harrison felt the walls closing in around him, the walls of the funeral parlor now like a tomb. There was no escape. The Hartwells had won. The game was over. Dr. Harrison stood frozen, a cold sweat trickling down his spine. Ezekiel Hartwell's words sunk in like a weight. Patriarch of the Hartwell family had emerged from the shadows, his presence commanding and undeniable, like a figure carved from stone. His calm demeanor only amplified the horror of the situation. He wasn't just a killer. He was the orchestrator, the mastermind, the one who had carefully woven the threads of death and deceit into the very fabric of Millbrook. And now, Harrison had walked right into the heart of it. The funeral parlor, which had once seemed like a solemn, if somewhat somber place, now felt like a mausoleum. Dark, suffocating, and alive with the echoes of the dead. The walls seemed to close in around him as Ezekiel's icy gaze locked onto him, and Rebecca stood by her father's side, watching with an almost predatory intensity. She was more than just a passive participant. She was every bit as complicit in the family's monstrous operations as her father. "You've made quite a mess, Doctor," Ezekiel said, his voice smooth but laced with an undertone of menace. "But you're not the first to try to uncover our secrets. And like all the others before you, you've underestimated us." Dr. Harrison's pulse raced, thoughts in overdrive. Every exit had been blocked. He had no way of escaping, no time to gather any of the evidence that could expose the Hartwell family. The journal was still hidden somewhere in this cursed house, but it might as well have been a million miles away. The only thing that mattered now was survival. His own, and perhaps the faintest hope that someone, somewhere, might one day uncover the truth. Ezekiel stepped forward, his presence like a physical force. "You think you've seen the depths of what we've done, but you haven't even begun to understand. You came here thinking you could stop us, but you've only revealed your own ignorance. We're not just a family of killers, Doctor. We're a family of survivalists, and we've been surviving for far longer than you could ever imagine." Dr. Harrison's breath caught in his throat. Surviving. What did he mean by that? Ezekiel continued, his voice colder now. "You're not the first outsider to come into Millbrook, uninvited, thinking they could disrupt the delicate balance we've created. We've been here for decades, working in the shadows, building our network, perfecting our craft. We're not just serial killers. We're predators. We know how to hide in plain sight, how to make people trust us, how to make them believe we're something we're not. We've mastered the art of deception, Doctor, and now you've fallen victim to it." Rebecca, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, her eyes gleaming with dark amusement. "Do you really think anyone will believe you? The people here in Millbrook, they trust us. They've trusted us for years. We've buried their loved ones, taken care of their dead. Do you honestly believe that after all this time, they'll listen to the word of an outsider who's been here less than a month?" Dr. Harrison's mind raced. They were right. They had built an empire on trust, on respectability. And no one would believe him, not without undeniable evidence. The Hartwells had lived in this town for over 2 decades, shaping its very foundation. Their web of influence spread far beyond Millbrook, extending into neighboring towns and possibly even states. They weren't just a family of killers. They were an institution, and institutions didn't fall easily. But even as Ezekiel spoke, something inside Dr. Harrison snapped. This was it. This was the moment. The Hartwells thought they had won, but they had underestimated the one thing that had always been their Achilles heel: the truth. "You're wrong," Dr. Harrison said, his voice steady now, the fear from earlier replaced by something colder, something more defiant. "The truth will come out. No matter how deeply you bury it, No matter how many people you manipulate, the truth is unstoppable. You can kill me, you'll never stop the truth from coming to light. Ezekiel's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the smile that had lingered on his lips vanished. You truly believe that? Think your death will make a difference? There will be no truth. There will only be silence. But Dr. Harrison didn't flinch. He could feel the weight of the journal in his mind, words burning in his memory. He couldn't let them win. Even if it cost him his life, he had to make sure that the world would know the depths of the Hartwell family's darkness. They had to be exposed. The truth had to be set free. You may have controlled this town for years, Hartwell, Dr. Harrison said, his voice unwavering. But there's one thing you can't control. You can't control history, and history will remember you for what you really are. Monsters. A flash of something, anger, perhaps, or recognition, flared in Ezekiel's eyes. For a brief moment, he seemed to hesitate, and in that hesitation, Dr. Harrison saw the crack in the foundation of the Hartwell empire. Rebecca, sensing her father's uncertainty, stepped forward again, her smile darkening. You think you can take us down with your words? With your journal? She laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the cold, empty funeral parlor. You're already dead, Doctor. You just don't know it yet. Dr. Harrison stood tall, despite the fear coursing through his veins. He could feel the walls closing in, but he also knew that he couldn't let them win. Family had built their power on lies, on deception, on the manipulation of trust. But the truth, however hidden, would always find a way to break free. You're right about one thing, Dr. Harrison said, his voice cold. I am dead, but I'm not the only one. And in that moment, he knew. It wasn't just his life at stake. It was the lives of all the victims, the ones the Hartwells had stolen, the ones they had buried and forgotten. He wasn't just fighting for his own survival anymore. He was fighting for the truth. And he wasn't about to let these monsters bury. As Ezekiel and Rebecca Hartwell closed in, Dr. Harrison made his choice. He would face whatever came next, knowing that, even in death, the truth would not be silenced. Harrison's mind raced as the walls of the Hartwell funeral parlor seemed to close in around him. Ezekiel and Rebecca were mere feet away now, their shadowy forms a dark omen of the family's twisted legacy. Words they had spoken to him echoed in his mind, each one more chilling than the last. You're dead? Rebecca had said, her smile wide, almost predatory. And for the first time, Harrison questioned whether he had miscalculated, whether he was indeed walking into the jaws of a beast that had been feeding for far too long. But as they advanced toward him, the weight of what was at stake sharpened his focus. He had learned enough over the past few weeks. Enough to know that if he didn't act now, he would never have the chance to expose the Hartwells. The journal was his lifeline, the final piece of evidence that could destroy them. He knew it. And he understood now that his survival was secondary to the truth he had uncovered. In his final moments, it wasn't his own life that consumed him. It was the lives of those he had failed to save, those lost in the shadows of the Hartwell family's ruthless machinations. They were not just victims, they were silent witnesses to the darkness that had seeped into the very soul of Millbrook. Dr. Harrison had to ensure they were not forgotten. Ezekiel stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. You still don't understand, do you, Doctor? You are nothing but a fleeting moment in the history we've written here. You've tried to uncover our secrets, but you've only scratched the surface. You think you can bring us down. The people of Millbrook will never believe you. They've trusted us for too long. Rebecca, who had been eerily silent for a moment, spoke again, her tone mocking. You know, it's almost tragic. You walked into our home, into our world, and now you're going to die here, with no one even knowing the truth. Your death will be just another footnote in the history of Millbrook, lost to the shadows. Dr. Harrison stood his ground, every instinct screaming to run, to flee from the inevitability of his situation. But something in him had changed. His fear had transformed into something far colder: determination. "Maybe I can't stop you," he said, his voice steady despite the threat surrounding him. "But the truth will always come to light. You can kill me, you can bury my body, but you can't bury the truth. The world will know what you've done." Ezekiel's eyes darkened, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. "You truly are a fool," he growled. "You think we care about your truth? We've erased the evidence of our past, hidden our crimes in plain sight. There is no truth you can expose that will stop us. Already forgotten, Doctor. The moment you set foot in Millbrook, your fate was sealed." Rebecca stepped closer, her gaze never leaving Dr. Harrison's. "You've done what you could, but you're too late. You won't leave here alive, and when you're gone, no one will even remember your name. You've wasted your life trying to stop something that's been happening for years. We're a family of survivalists, Doctor. The world won't care about your truth." It was then that Dr. Harrison realized the full scale of their depravity. The Hartwells didn't just murder to survive. They had built their lives on death. They had mastered the art of deception, the craft of creating a legacy built on lies, manipulation, and fear. They had become the very embodiment of control, hiding in plain sight for decades. But as he stood, staring into the cold eyes of Ezekiel Hartwell and the mocking gaze of Rebecca, something ignited in Dr. Harrison, a fierce clarity. He knew they were right about one thing: he wasn't going to escape this place. But what they didn't know, was that he had already made his peace with it. Truth wasn't something they could control. It was something that lived inside every victim they had ever taken. It was something that couldn't be erased. Not by them, not by anyone. "I may not survive this," Dr. Harrison said, his voice low but full of conviction. "But you won't be able to escape the truth. It will haunt you forever. You can kill me, you can bury me, but you can't stop what's coming. You've built your empire on death, but death doesn't belong to you. It will never belong to you." Rebecca's face twisted with something darker now. Anger, perhaps, but also something else, a flicker of doubt. Ezekiel, however, was beyond such emotion. His face remained a stone mask, unwavering. "You're wrong, Doctor," he said, stepping forward, his voice cold and final. "We control everything. And when you're gone, no one will care about your truth. We'll bury it just like we've buried everything else." But as Ezekiel reached for Dr. Harrison, something strange happened. A shift, a moment of clarity that had been brewing beneath the surface, a feeling that the battle for truth was not lost. Not yet. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted the confrontation. For a fleeting second, Ezekiel hesitated, a sharp glance darting toward the door. The distraction was enough. Dr. Harrison took a step back, his mind racing with a single thought: survive, even if just for a few more seconds. It was then that the door to the basement flew open, and a figure emerged, causing both Ezekiel and Rebecca to pause. Momentary distraction was all Dr. Harrison needed. Without thinking, he bolted for the stairs, his legs burning with every step, adrenaline surging through him. His mind was a blur of fear and determination. Truth would survive, no matter what. Ezekiel's voice rang out behind him, full of venom. "You can't outrun us, Doctor. You can't escape." But Dr. Harrison was already halfway up the stairs, his hands gripping the railing, his heart pounding in his ears. The chase had begun. The family's hunt for him had shifted from a psychological game to a desperate race for survival. They knew now that he had uncovered everything. He was their enemy, and they would stop at nothing to make sure the truth he carried would never see the light of day. As Dr. Harrison made his way through the house, he knew the odds were slim, that escape was near impossible. But in that moment, with the weight of everything he had uncovered pressing down on him, realized that this was no longer just about him. This was about the thousands of people they had manipulated, the countless lives they had taken, and the countless others who would follow in their wake if he failed. He had to survive, if only for a few moments longer, because the truth, his truth, was too dangerous to be buried again. Dr. Harrison's lungs burned as he sprinted through the darkened hallways of the Hartwell funeral parlor. Each step echoed loudly in his ears. The sound of his heart beat, thudding in his chest like a drum, couldn't stop now. His life was no longer just a matter of survival. It was a race against time to get the truth out before it was lost forever. Behind him could hear the footsteps of Ezekiel and Rebecca growing closer. They were relentless. Like wolves hunting a wounded prey, their pursuit was methodical, their steps measured. He knew they had already anticipated every move he made. There was no escape, not through the front door, not through any of the windows. This house had been built to trap, and it was closing in on him, the journal. He had to get back to the journal. If they found it first, everything would be lost. The entire truth of what the Hartwell family had done would vanish, buried under their lies and bloodstains. There would be no record of the twisted experiments they had carried out on their victims, no trace of the thousands of lives they had manipulated and destroyed. Dr. Harrison's mind raced, calculating his every move. He was in the family's domain now. He had seen the layout of the house, knew the ins and outs of the funeral parlor. But he also knew the house better than anyone. The doors, staircases, the hidden rooms. The trap had already been set, and he had walked right into it. His hand brushed against the wall as he turned down another corridor. His breath came in ragged gasps, but he couldn't afford to stop. He had to keep moving. They were getting closer. He reached the door leading to the basement, the same door that had sealed his fate just moments ago. His pulse quickened, but he steadied himself, taking a deep breath. If he could just get down to the basement, he could retrieve the journal. If he could get that far, he could expose them all. The rest of the town could be saved. Maybe not in time for him, but for those who hadn't yet fallen victim to the Hartwell family. His hand gripped the door's cold handle. For a brief moment, everything went silent. The footsteps had stopped. He glanced over his shoulder, but there was no sign of his pursuers. He was running out of time. The longer he waited, the more they would be able to close in on him. He pulled the door open slowly, just enough to slip through. The musty, chemical-laden air of the basement hit him, and for a fleeting second felt a wave of nausea wash over him. The basement, the heart of the family's twisted operation, felt like a tomb, and in that moment, Dr. Harrison realized that it was more than just a place where they prepared the dead. It was where they had forged their empire of death. As he descended into the basement, he could hear nothing but his own breath, the rhythmic thud of his heart in his ears. He moved quickly but cautiously, every step careful, knowing that one misstep could lead to his demise. His eyes scanned the room as he reached the bottom of the stairs. Faint glow from a single hanging bulb illuminated the rows of jars filled with preserved organs, each more grotesque than the last. The tables where bodies had been dissected, experimented on. He had seen it all in the journal. He knew what lay behind every corner, what the family had hidden in every shadow. But the journal, where was it? He moved swiftly to the back of the room, to the very place where he had left it. The leather-bound book that held the key to everything. His fingers grazed the pile of burial clothes that had hidden it. His heart skipped a beat as his eyes locked onto the familiar sight. There it was. He reached for it, feeling the familiar weight of the journal in his hands. The truth was in his grasp. He had it, but as his fingers closed around it, a sharp noise rang out above him. The unmistakable creak of the stairs. His heart skipped a beat. Ezekiel. They were back coming. Dr. Harrison's instincts screamed at him to move. He shoved the journal into his coat, the weight of it now more vital than ever. The door at the top of the basement creaked open, and he heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps. They were close, too close. He had no choice now. He had to run. He darted toward the back of the basement, to a small, hidden passage he had discovered earlier. It was tight, narrow, and would be difficult to maneuver through, but it was the only way out. He didn't dare turn back to see if they were behind him. He knew they would be. The passage was darker than the rest of the basement, and Dr. Harrison had to move slowly, carefully. His hands scraped against the cold stone walls as he navigated the tight space. But he pushed forward. Every step felt like it might be his last, but he couldn't afford to stop. Not when he was this close. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from behind him. The basement door had been thrown open. The sound of footsteps, heavy and relentless, followed. The Hartwells had entered the basement, and they knew he was here. The passage ahead seemed endless, the walls pressing in, but Dr. Harrison kept moving. He had to get out. The journal in his coat felt like a lifeline, a beacon of hope in a place consumed by darkness. But just as he rounded the corner, his foot caught on something. He stumbled, falling to the ground with a loud thud. For a split second, everything seemed to freeze. His body ached, his mind raced. He had to get up. They were coming. He pushed himself off the floor, scrambling to regain his footing, but as he stood, a cold hand gripped his arm. Ezekiel. He had caught up to him. "Did you really think you could escape?" Ezekiel's voice was low, filled with contempt. "You've been running this entire time, Doctor. But this is where it ends." Dr. Harrison felt the weight of the truth in his pocket, the journal pressing against his side. He couldn't let it go, couldn't let them win. The hunt had reached its climax, and Dr. Harrison knew one thing for certain. The truth would not be buried. Not while he still breathed. And if it meant his life, would make sure the world would learn the name of the Hartwell family and the monstrosities they had committed in the shadows. The question now was simple. Would he make it out alive to see the truth unfold? Or would he become just another forgotten victim, lost in the wake of the Hartwells' reign of terror? Dr. Harrison's body jerked as Ezekiel's hand tightened around his arm, pulling him back into the cold, narrow passage. The darkness pressed in from all sides, suffocating him with the weight of the truth he carried in his coat pocket. The journal was still there, still a lifeline to everything the Hartwells had tried to hide. His mind raced, his pulse thundering in his ears. He had come so close. The truth was within reach, but the moment Ezekiel's fingers closed around his arm, Dr. Harrison knew his fate had already been sealed. "You think you've uncovered something, that this..." Ezekiel's voice was low, almost pitying. "This will change anything. You're nothing, Doctor. Just a fleeting presence in our carefully crafted world." Dr. Harrison twisted his arm, trying to break free, but Ezekiel's grip was ironclad, unyielding. He was stronger than he appeared, his calm demeanor hiding the violence lurking beneath. "The people of Millbrook trust us," Ezekiel continued, his voice filled with disdain. "You're nothing more than a disturbance, a brief shadow in a story that has been unfolding for years." Every word cut deeper than the last. Dr. Harrison's breath came in ragged gasps, and his mind screamed at him to do something. Anything to escape. But he couldn't. He was trapped in the darkness of the Hartwell funeral parlor, only his failing strength and the truth that threatened to slip through his fingers. Rebecca stepped closer, her footsteps soft and deliberate, echoing in the silence of the basement. "You've seen too much, Doctor," she said, her tone sweet yet chilling. "Now, you'll see the cost of exposing us." Ezekiel released his grip on Dr. Harrison's arm, only to twist him roughly around, pushing him toward the center of the basement. Dr. Harrison's feet stumbled beneath him, but he regained his balance. His eyes darted around, scanning the room for any possible way out, but the walls were closing in. The journal, the only thing standing between him and the Hartwells' continued reign of terror. was still nestled safely in his coat. "Do you think this will stop us?" Ezekiel's voice was harsh, but there was something darker behind it. "You've seen our legacy, Doctor. It's already written. You're not the first to try and take us down. You'll be forgotten, just like the others." Dr. Harrison's thoughts flickered to the townspeople, to the families who had entrusted their dead to the Hartwells, to the victims whose lives had been stolen without anyone ever knowing the truth. His heart clenched. "I can't let this die with me. I can't let them erase it." Without thinking, Dr. Harrison yanked the journal from his coat pocket, holding it out to Ezekiel. The truth, the heart of everything he had uncovered, was now exposed in his hands. Ezekiel's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, Dr. Harrison thought he saw a flicker of genuine fear in the patriarch's gaze. "What are you going to do with it?" Ezekiel sneered, taking a step closer. "Think you can use it against us? This town is ours. You are nothing." Dr. Harrison stood tall, his chest heaving with the effort to stay composed. "This is the moment. It has to be. I'm going to make sure the world knows who you are." Dr. Harrison said, his voice filled with a defiance he had not known he still possessed. "You won't hide behind your lies any longer. People will know what you've done. Every victim, every life you've stolen. It will come to light." Rebecca let out a soft, mocking laugh. "You're delusional." She reached forward, her fingers brushing the journal, and for a moment, it seemed like she was going to rip it from his hands. But Dr. Harrison was quicker. He yanked the journal back, clutching it against his chest with a mixture of desperation and determination. "You can kill me," he said, his voice steady now, "but you'll never kill the truth. You've buried so many lives, but you can't bury what's in here. This will follow you, no matter where you go." Ezekiel stepped forward suddenly, his face twisted in rage. "Enough of your lies," he shouted, his voice echoing in the basement. "You think the truth matters. You think anyone will listen to your story. We control the narrative. We always have." In that moment, Dr. Harrison saw it. The flicker of uncertainty in Ezekiel's eyes. The monster had been pretending to be invincible for so long that he had begun to believe it himself. But now, faced with the very thing that threatened to expose his dark empire, his confidence faltered. "You've already lost," Dr. Harrison said, his voice cold and unwavering. "It's over. The truth is stronger than your control." Ezekiel lunged toward him, fury in his eyes, but Dr. Harrison was ready. In a final, desperate act, he shoved the journal into the air, using it as a barrier between himself and the oncoming storm. Ezekiel's hands clamped down on it, but Dr. Harrison didn't let go. The two men grappled, each determined to claim the journal for themselves, each determined to protect or destroy the truth. In the struggle, Dr. Harrison felt the weight of the journal slip from his grasp, falling into the darkness of the basement floor. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Rebecca stepped forward again, her voice laced with venom. "You should have stayed out of it, Doctor," she said, her eyes glinting with a twisted satisfaction. "Now you'll join the others in the shadows." Dr. Harrison's vision blurred, and his body trembled with exhaustion. But his resolve remained. Even if he couldn't make it out alive, he had to know, he had to make sure. This family of monsters would not be forgotten. With every last ounce of strength, he lunged toward the journal. His fingers brushed the leather, bound covered just as Ezekiel reached down to stop him. The world around him seemed to slow, and for a moment, Dr. Harrison felt a strange calm settle over him. He had given everything to uncover the truth, to expose the horrors of the Hartwell family. Now, no matter what happened next, that truth would live on. Even if it was only in his last breath, the journal was within his grasp once more. And with it, the fate of the Hartwell family would be sealed. The struggle between Dr. Harrison and Ezekiel Hartwell intensified, each man pulling with all his might. But there was a finality to the moment that Dr. Harrison could feel deep in his bones. The journal, now gripped tightly in his hands, felt heavier than ever. He could almost hear the echoes of the victims who had been silenced, their stories waiting to be told. As the two men struggled for control, Dr. Harrison's mind sharpened. The fight was more than physical, it was ideological, a war for truth versus power. The truth, now within his grasp, was a weapon far stronger than anything the Hartwells had ever wielded. The journal was a testament to their depravity, their reign of terror, and their attempt to bury the souls they had destroyed. Rebecca stepped forward, her hand reaching for the journal as well. But Dr. Harrison, with every ounce of his fading strength, pulled it closer. His fingers were slick with sweat, his body trembling from exhaustion, but he was resolute. "Let go of it," Ezekiel growled, his voice barely controlled. "No." Dr. Harrison spat, his voice filled with a defiance that surprised even him. "This ends here." In one final, desperate movement, Dr. Harrison pushed forward, slamming the journal into Ezekiel's chest. The force knocked Ezekiel back, giving Dr. Harrison a brief window of opportunity. The journal was his. It would be the last piece of evidence, proof that would expose everything the Hartwells had tried so hard to keep hidden. Ezekiel's face twisted in rage, but it was more than that. There was fear there too, fear of what would happen if the truth came to light. Fear of losing the grip he had held over this small town, this place where his family had woven its empire. Dr. Harrison took a deep breath, savoring the victory, even as the shadows closed in around him. He knew this might be his last moment, but he also knew that the Hartwell family's reign of terror was over. Truth would not be buried this time. The journal, with its dark history of murder, manipulation and experimentation, would find its way into the hands of those who could stop them. As Harrison's vision blurred, and his legs began to give way beneath him, he felt a strange peace settle over him. He had given everything for this moment. The weight of the journal in his hands felt like the weight of justice itself. A justice that had been denied to the countless victims who had suffered in silence. Ezekiel, staring at Dr. Harrison in disbelief, reached for the journal one last time, but it was too late. The final act had been written. The Hartwells could no longer control the truth. They had sealed their own fate, and it was only a matter of time before the world would know the horrors they had wrought. Dr. Harrison's hand loosened, the journal slipping from his grasp as his body succumbed to the toll of the struggle, collapsed to the cold floor, but in his final moments, he knew the truth would survive. It was in the world now, unstoppable, relentless. As the shadows of Millbrook closed in around him, Dr. Harrison's last thoughts were of those he had failed to save, and those who would now finally be given a voice. The story of the Hartwell family would not die in the dark. The truth would live on. And with that final chapter of the Hartwell funeral parlor's horrifying legacy began to unravel. Forever, the hunt had ended. The monsters had been exposed, and the truth, like death itself, would never be buried again.